Warm welcome to Soul Cafe. And the idea being that on each session, we have a slightly different format along with a different topic, so different ways of exploring spiritual concepts and ideas. And today it's going to be an interview format, which is why you have double vision here. There's two of us, and our topic, it just seems so much the need of the time is this idea of stability and adaptation. So, looking at our resources and resilience in very changing and uncertain times. So, first, we'll start with a reflection. And as usual, we invite you to be seated comfortably. And if you want to experiment with eyes open, then that's certainly something you can try. And taking a moment to really allow the body and the mind to settle into this space, this moment, to be fully attentive to what's happening right now. And there should be that feeling of simplifying and slowing down as my attention comes into this moment. The feeling of time stopping, no rushing, no pressure of time. Able to be fully present for the self, giving the self my full attention. And I start to bring into my mind's eye this image of a center point and many objects circling around it. I suppose a bit like the model of the solar system we often have seen as children. A center point of focus and then these satellites, these objects floating around. The center point remains stable, constant, and fixed, and everything else rotating around. The center point does not move in relation to everything else. It stays stable. Everything else is doing exactly what it's meant to do, moving around in its orbit. Some things moving quickly, some things moving slowly, some things seeming very big, some things seeming very small. And in some ways, this describes our experience as we move through time, our day. In a way, we are that center point, the observer, the thinker, the experiencer. And there's many scenes and situations happening around us. Some unfolding quickly, some very slow. Some issues seeming quite big and some small. I remain the stable, centered observer. Everything else doing exactly what it's meant to, moving around me. I don't leave my position. I'm able to observe and respond from this stable position. Going deeply into the experience of that stable state, becoming that stable point in the center of my own universe. As if I am behind the forehead, this point of attention, point of awareness. Everything outside, observing it all. But even the different thoughts and feelings in my own head swirling around, are in a way a bit separate from me, the observer. I can watch it all from this very calm, stable, centered point, knowing what to respond to and when and how, from this very calm, stable place. So much power and accuracy is born from that stability. I'm able to respond. I don't have to move away or reject or react. But I don't step away from this stable state. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Soul Cafe. And so this topic was certainly inspired with just constant unfolding events that were happening. We're talking about adjusting to times of change. Do you feel sometimes that we try to just prepare ourselves to just singular events of upheaval versus isn't change always happening?
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about well-being and health and wellness, and one of the ways I describe a very high state of well-being, our healthy, natural state, is actually a great facility. We say with change, but ultimately it's a great facility with letting go. We say change is happening all around us in the sense that everything is temporary. So everything is coming and going. So this ability to know the three aspects of change. One of them is to create or newness. One is to sustain, and the other is to let go. Newness and letting go are completely intertwined. They cannot be separated. So when someone says, I want something new to happen, there also has to be a facility with letting go. This is a huge part of change. And then the sustainability. So that's a sign of being very healthy because it's inevitable. It's part of living in the physical realm. Everything is temporary. So I have to have a facility with letting go, with change. It's happening all the time. It's been said even the body that we're sitting in is not at a cellular level the same body as, say, 7-8 years ago. So change is completely constant.
So what do you feel then? I mean, because someone might be watching this and it's just something that's particularly challenging that's happening. But it does feel like at times where we can be comfortable with things the way they are, or it's not the kind of change that challenges things inside until it comes to a point, for example, if something was starting to affect my life. In that case, could that be a turning point? Or perhaps it could just be again, sort of a one-time thing I need to deal with.
Obviously, this is going to be happening all the time, so it will never, I think, be one time. But yeah, it's helping to cultivate a couple of powers that stability and adaptation sort of partner up to or are equivalent to is tolerance and accommodation. And how we need these qualities so much as we move into increasingly uncertain times. Tolerance and accommodation, we're calling them stability and adaptation. Stability or tolerance is this idea of I maintain my integrity even as things are changing around me. So we say I can tolerate change. I'm maintaining that position. Adaptation is I'm able to accommodate the change. I'm not rejecting it or fighting it or violent towards it or reactive. I can adapt. Again, these two very much go together. So one of the qualities that was coming into my mind just now with adaptation was the water flowing around a stone. Is it doesn't sort of ram against the stone, then back up and take another go at it, and then back up and just keep. No, it accommodates. It continues with its journey. It's extremely flexible, so it can move around the stones. It's doing that very gently. It's sort of molding the stone as well. But this capacity to move or flow or flex with what is happening, still keeping my eye on the target, the water still continuing on its path, its journey, but it's able to adjust to what comes along the way. And there's incredible learning opportunities in both of those qualities.
Now, there are many who might have joined Raj Yoga interviews, and they might be seeing Soul Cafe sessions, but for those who have not, these sessions are still based on the foundation of Raj Yoga. And so, even just listening to the commentary, there's obviously how. I think many really want to feel stable, they want to maintain that sense of integrity, they want to experience from a meaningful place that capacity to accommodate, just as you were mentioning about water. But it's interesting because trying to be stable inside, I've heard many say, just be peaceful, just be peaceful. And there's a bit of burning down that can happen. Could you share what your experience was during that commentary for that to actually be something meaningful?
I think that what can happen, I know it was for me, was I sort of knew, yes, what I wanted to happen, but the how was definitely lacking. And it's often just a lack of options or instruction as to, what I need to do to make that happen. And so I have found that it's almost inseparable now whenever I'm exploring any of these different states, these spiritual postures, if you will. I'm always touching my understanding through the teachings of Raj Yoga. I can't separate understanding with execution. I think at the end of the day, it will become our natural nature. We'll be able to do these things without having to have that knowledge sort of working through our head. But it's incredible how much education can help to awaken. And the word education means to educe or draw out. So an education that draws out these capacities in the soul, they're there, but they need to be educated out. So when we say be peaceful, we do have an innate capacity. It's one of our most basic capacities as spiritual beings. We do have incredible capacity for peace, but it's completely, if you will, locked up inside. And the key to unlock it is the right information and education. So education will unlock or draw out, educe these natural capacities within the self. So I can't actually separate them anymore, but I know that feeling of, I know I should do this. This is the right thing, but I just can't seem to make it happen in a sincere way. There's emotional upheaval or whatever going on.
Using that example you're talking about to draw out, do you have a physical example where eventually I don't need this knowledge? And I think many are like, well, what does that mean when you say that? I want to be peaceful, I need some information, but eventually, do you have an example where something that eventually you practice might be clunky, but then eventually it comes to a point where you really don't have to think about it anymore, but you're emerging a certain capacity?
Definitely, there's many examples in movement. I remember from dance training, but even today, it was very. I have this client that we were working with, and that which I find fascinating. I constantly just stand back. I find them just absolutely fascinating because they're of maybe a bit of a larger girth, but they have incredible alignment. Much, but they have a lot of dance background. That might be why, but very good. So you really have to have your eyes on to be able to see this alignment. They have natural alignment. But what they'll often share, so I know they have the capacity to do actually quite advanced movements. But what they'll often share if we're doing something is I'll be watching, and then I sort of try and figure out what cue would be useful. And they will let me know if a cue is useful or not useful. In other words, I'm trying to draw out the capacity with the right instruction. So, they'll say that cue is really useful. So there's this kind of very short-term education through just a cue that's activating the capacity. And then there comes a point, if we do it repeatedly, where basically they're unlearning other stuff and re-emerging natural stuff.
So there's the letting go.
There's the letting go, there's the unlearning, because we're again saying these are our natural capacities. So it's a bit funny that what is unnatural became the default or the familiar, and what is natural became very, very distant. It's an interesting thing, but it's also such a reassuring thing, because it means that, okay, if that's the natural, if that's the innate, then of course it's possible to bring it back and have it stabilize if I put in the time. But I'm going to have to keep letting go of the familiar, of what's become the default. I'll have to pay attention to that. So I need to have all of that understanding, the right cueing, the right instruction to activate the innate until it becomes stable again. The best example I've seen, we've talked about before, is the whole synapse firing of the brain pathways. There'll be the original one, and then maybe through addiction, whatever, some other pathway became dominant, and the original one is almost atrophied or latent, dormant. And so I need a process of attention, constant attention, to get that original pathway firing. There'll be a time when they're both firing at the same time. That's very awkward. And then there'll be a point when what had become dominant merges again and the original is all that's left. And that's natural then.
So before I ask about that experience of being a soul, just with the example you're talking about, do you find that we overthink? That thinking too much, trying to emerge your capacity, you're getting cues. That overthinking analysis can actually maybe become your worst enemy.
It depends on the person. All I know is that in physical fitness, to sit there and think is not going to get anything done. That you actually have to do something. I can't sit there and think and analyze the push-up. It's great. It's a great exercise for the chest, but I can't keep having these. And eventually I will have to get down there and give it a try and see what. So I think it's confusing to souls, because when we say spiritual, they're like, how can you do anything? You're talking about invisible stuff. You're talking about what is doing? So we like the word being, but there is things I'm doing as in these spiritual practices. I am doing things, and I think that's the sticking point. So we keep going into thinking because we're grappling with even to be soul conscious. It's incredible. We go all over the map and call it meditation, and but I'm not actually doing soul consciousness. I'm thinking about it, I'm analyzing the significance of it, the benefits of it, all great. Now that I'm fully on board, convinced after all that analysis, I need to do it. I need to do it. And there's massive resistance to doing it. It was very interesting. The client today was exhausted when they walked in. They said, can we just do Shavasana for an hour? And I'm like, no, we can't do Shavasana for an hour. And I could see they were exhausted mentally and physically, but I knew that moving something would make them probably feel better. So we had to have what we call beach entry. They were going to have to do something, but we had to gently move them from nothingness into doing. And perhaps that's what the case is for many of us, that we don't dive into the deep end, but it's unavoidable. I will eventually have to do soul consciousness, not just think about it, but do it. And that, I think, is when it gets confusing.
I think that's why it gets even more trickier when it comes to spirituality. as you had mentioned, I mean, eventually you can't just stand there and keep thinking about doing push-ups. I mean, it's very clear when you're actually at least attempting a push-up, it can that looks like you're actually attempting a push-up. But when it comes to actually the experience of being so, I wonder if we actually recognize the difference from just thinking about it, analyzing about it, reflecting on it, reminiscing, and actually going into that experience.
Yeah, and again, all of those are useful. They're helping to convince me. They're paving the way. They're keeping me on track. They're all very useful, enthusiastic about it. It's great. But nothing will replace doing it because I can't access all the capacities of a soul without doing soul consciousness. So eventually I will have to walk through that door rather than window shopping and seeing all the attractive elements of soul consciousness while outside. Eventually, I will have to go through the door and experience it.
Do you find that, what has your journey been like in terms of that? Have you found that you've also been able to discern when I'm actually just really just thinking about it? I'm not really actually really going there.
There is a principle in physical movement, which I would probably describe as muscle recruitment. So it is possible to do an exercise in what you might call sort of a not really attentive way. I could lift my arm. Many do this. They lift their arm. And then we ask them to focus on, for example, scapular stabilization, the wing at the back. Okay, really activate that as you're doing it. And this idea of muscle recruitment I find so connected to spiritual practice that I actually am very deliberate so that you begin to feel in physical fitness, you want them to feel the difference between activating a muscle while moving and not activating the muscle while moving, and learning that difference. It's subtle, but it's so important. And the same thing happens, I think, in spirituality. Is we can sort of operate in this surface level of, yeah, I know everyone's a soul, they're a point of light, but I'll know I'm not really in that. There'll be certain inner signals that I'm not actually detaching from the body. I'm not actually detaching from all of this image and the whole paradigm. There are certain signs and signals of when I have detached. So it helps me to know the difference between the two. And that's really important, to develop that sensitivity.
Could you share about what those signs would be if I'm still stuck? And what those
I could go
signs
get a
would be?
picture of what it looks like when you're soul conscious. Get Daddy Goals are. This is what it looks like. The signs of when I'm stuck.
And the signs when I'm there. Because I think that it can be quite deceptive still. Until you're in a situation where you're really,
Yeah. So before she, as we say, left the body, passed away, Daddy Jenki was more and more. I mean, she was, when I came into the study, she would give classes that went on for a very long time. And it got to be a bit of souls with the senior students would suddenly, you see them kind of getting up and wandering out of the room because they were very long classes. They were usually at the end of another class, and now you're sitting for, she was known. I mean, she just has such a wealth of spiritual understanding to share, and she was very sensitive to what needed to be said at any given time. It was remarkable. But then as it got more and more towards the end of this life, she started to just say, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti. And that's the number one sign. Number one sign. Now it's interesting, Shanti means peace. So this experience of peace is the number, regardless, and this is important, regardless of what's going on around me. No irritation, no impatience, no things should be this way, things should be that way. Very neutral. Shanti. No waste in the mind. Shanti. And not even, I want to help, I want to, nothing. It's just completely peaceful. Completely peaceful, so neutral. And to get to that stage, and I know your question, next question will be, but there's so many different kinds of peace. How do we know It's that peace. Again, it is not peace that is a reaction or a result of mountains or nice people or nice music or certain lighting. It's this thing that's coming up from inside, from detaching. Because the number one definition of Om Shanti, we say it's, yes, I am a peaceful embodiment, I am a peaceful being. But actually the way that we describe Om Shanti, I am a soul separate from the body. It's extremely simple. Soul consciousness, extremely simple. I am a soul separate from the body. Now, as you sit here right now, which one am I doing? Am I thinking it? Or have I actually experienced? This body will feel like it belongs more to the chair in which I'm sitting than it does to me. So there's nothing fancy or exotic, or there's no rainbows and puppy dogs or anything like this. It's just I am separate from this body and everything associated with this body. It all belongs to the body. I, the soul, have a completely different story. Right? I'm eternal, visitor, all of these things. So it's a very simple thing that creates such a high, the highest level of detachment. I can't figure my way into that level of detachment. I can't figure out, well, if I was detached theoretically, then this is how I'd be with people. You can't sort of guess your way into this level of detachment. I have to actually be in that level of detachment and see what happens as a result. It's very tricky and yet so simple. So it's really starting to gauge for the self. Now, at the beginning of this organization in the mid 1930s and probably more the 40s, those first 14 years, we know that they did many drills, and they used the word drills. I loved it. So they're doing something. They did spiritual drills on soul consciousness. There's really two main things they practiced: the experience of themselves. They used to actually do crazy things of pretend that you're dead, a corpse, your body's a corpse. Like really, I think others might find it a little disturbing, but really going into the understanding, this is temporary, I am not. Like really very simple, nothing exotic or romantic or, ornate about it. So lots about, and then they try some different frightening scenes, like, go and watch a surgery, crazy stuff, just again to understand I am not the body, I'm not physical, really understand. So very basic. And then of course the other was to see others as soul, which we call Baha'i Drishti. Vision of brotherhood. Again, we can be very analytical and romantic about this idea of brotherhood and still not being seeing others as souls. It's the physical eyes are extremely resistant to soul consciousness. The physical eyes love to go into body consciousness. So they practiced a lot of what they call Baha'i Drishti, vision of brotherhood, brother to brother Drishti vision, where they established this feeling for themselves, and they really saw others in this very qualitative way. It's not just I see a point of light in the center of the forehead, but really experiencing that being, the qualities of the being, the value of the being. That being is also a child of God, really going deeply. And the car is so secondary. This vehicle, this outer shell, so not in any way shaping the experience. It's very challenging for us to do. We are at this point, I know there was that book and series, What the Bleep Do We Know, which looked at how at at a very deep level, these organs are now actually wired to operate on the physical.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They actually will not cooperate with what we're trying to do. They're wired, in a second, You have to just watch yourself and you'll realize in 1 second, I look at someone, I immediately see, in less than a second, gender, race, age, size, actions,
Defects.
all of it in a second. Can you imagine a state where that is not what we notice at all? It's got nothing to do with anything. We immediately feel the quality or vibration of the being.
Now, I just want to also remind that moving forward next week onwards, we'll also, once we actually get consent from those who are actually joining by Zoom, we'll also stream online live on YouTube as well. So those on Zoom and those on YouTube, they're welcome to ask questions. And for those on Zoom, you're welcome to unmute yourself, or you want to type in the chat box. Those on YouTube, you're also welcome to type in the chat box as well. So if you have questions, let us know. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your physical hand or your virtual hand, just so that we also want to acknowledge you may have other questions as well. Okay. Oh, we have a question.
Or maybe sharing.
The speaker.
It fell asleep.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay.
So, can you hear me? Yeah. So I think at this point, a lot of people are so fearful of, making decisions because of too much attachment, the lack of knowledge, the right, education, as Judy mentioned. So, for a situation where you lost your power to decide, and you just think that someone's decision might be beneficial for you, but you're unsure, but because you trusted them, so you just follow their advice. But then, I lost my power to decide. And, you face the consequences. So my question is, how do you deal with this situation?
Yeah. I think first off, we always acknowledge that we are learning. And it gets, this idea of power to decide is huge when, in terms of the objective of Raj Yoga, which is to be a sovereign or master of the self, to be able to rule my own kingdom without any advisor, then I'm able to make benevolent, these are win-win choices, benevolent decisions. And what we realize is a benevolent decision has to be based in purity. So that means that there is no ego, no attachment or fear, no greed, none of this going on. So the only way I'm really is my intellect, which is the decision maker, my capacity to decide is going to depend completely on the degree to which I've become pure. It's not in any way going to be dependent on any information out there. Nothing out there, good or bad, or nothing. It has nothing to do with any of it, actually. And it kind of, in a sense, it means that, because often our decision is when we say information, we kind of start to go, we were joking this morning, to Google or wherever, we start to just gather worldly information. Information, whether, let's say it's a physical decision, it might be a financial decision, it might be a relationship decision. We just start to gather worldly information and try to base our decision on that. And what spirituality is suggesting is it has nothing to do with any of that. It will be completely dependent on my level of purity as a soul. How free can I become from those forces? We say anger blinds, desire, blinded by desire, blinded by anger, crippled by fear. We use these kinds of words, all having to do with discerning and decision making. So I need to kind of be free. And when it comes to, as an example, which I think is relevant to these times, decisions around the body, that is the most difficult one for souls, because we have the closest relationship the soul has is with this body. More than any other person or any other thing, it's with the body. So it's really high stakes. And we are most blind because it's such an intimate attachment. We're most blind when it comes to decisions around the body. It's very hard for us to have that purity, that spirituality with decisions around the body. And it's fascinating when you see souls who have really done that spiritual work. And over the years, I've gotten to see a few scenarios, and I kind of see the same pattern. It's so fascinating. There's a couple of the senior students, one's pictured behind Nora's head there, but they, as the body aged, and there's something called settlement of karma in spirituality as well, which many may not be aware of, and that can also affect the decision making. But as the body aged, of course, things started to happen to it, required medical intervention. Some were in complete agreement with what the doctors were choosing to do. Others were in complete disagreement with what the doctors were prescribing. What I had noticed over and over is the soul who is actually it's happening to, they didn't care either way. That was not the point at all. Their only commitment was to service. That was it. That was at that point, because of their spiritual involvement, all they cared was, I need to keep, I have this commitment to service. I have a deep, deep love for humanity. So you literally would see them, this decision making going on in their head wasn't, oh, you should use this drug, you shouldn't use that. They didn't care at all. Had nothing to do with anything for them. What mattered to them was, is it possible to still do service to the last breath? All they cared about was serving through the body. They knew everything else was just karmic settlement according to drama. Didn't need to get in. All they cared about was, and it would be reported that even when Dee was in a coma, one of the scenes, the vibration in the room was so peaceful and sacred. The body is in a coma, and the soul is still serving. They don't care whether the mistake was made. They really don't. That to them isn't a good or bad decision. It's got nothing. It's a moot point because they don't have attachment to the body. They completely understand the big picture. All they cared about was, so you could literally see them finally make the decision. Look, I've gone as far as I can in this body. I can't serve in it anymore. Everyone's trying to keep me in it. I'm going. I can do more service. I'm out of here. Eventually, everyone's like all around the world, everyone's doing yoga to keep them in the body. And the soul flies away. They're on a completely different agenda. They're free. There's none of these insecurities and issues that really blind and distort our decision making. It's not anyone out there that's blinding my decision making. It's these forces inside, the ego, the fear, the attachment. That's what blinds my decision making. So that's why it's such a personal thing. It depends on purity. And whatever decision I make, I learn so much about my spiritual stage. That's what I have found interesting about these times. In my head, there's no space for criticizing this person or that person or disrespect. Like, it's got nothing to do with anything. Everyone's doing the best they can in very interesting times. But what I can do is look at myself and see, to what degree is spirituality? Not about, the body, and I'm worried about the body, but what degree is my spiritual stage, my purity as a soul, to what degree is that? Because souls get this very confused, this topic of purity, because we're so used to only understanding physical purity. And I'll be completely honest, there's nothing that is physically pure at this time. You can go get organic food if you want. It is not pure. Nothing is pure at this time. So there's no point in saying this is less toxic, that's more. It's all toxic. I don't mean to be depressing, but it is, because of the ones that are creating it, us. What we've got going on inside are all of these crazy forces, ego, etc. So that's going into everything we create. as is the soul, so is the environment around them. That's why, Gandhi's great quote, be the change you want to see, or what we say in the Brahma Kumaris, self-transformation leads to world transformation. So as I change, the world changes. So think about the rubbish going on in your own head, multiply that by everybody. What else could be happening out there? Everything is filled with toxin because of this. So the only, that particular argument, that this is more pure, this is more clean on the physical level, it never has, at this time, it doesn't hold water because everything, because of the ones that are creating it, everything is filled with some interesting vibration. So all I can do is work on my spiritual stage amidst this context I find, and see and learn, try making a decision, check in to what degree was spirituality involved in that decision. I don't know if any of that made sense, Pauline.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah,
Um, Actually, when I was really sick over 2 weeks ago,
yeah.
when I got the results, actually I was like, why I'm not worried? Why
Mm,
I'm not, it's just like, okay, I was, tested, positive. Um, it's just amazing how I dealt it with, calmness and stillness and not thinking about my job, not losing, not thinking about losing my income. But
mhm,
I think I just feel like this has to happen. And this is what, I really need to, uh, apply what I've learned from the study. And
mhm, mhm,
everyone, like I know they were so worried and they were just surprised how I dealt it with calmness. And yeah, I'm fine. And they offering all the help, which is so wonderful. Um,
mhm,
but with, the study that I've learned and now it's, it's happening how I face, how I remain stable
mhm,
and applying the the principles that I learned. And one thing too that I reminded is I think we discussed it on our previous studies about being a trustee
right, right.
of myself.
Mhm,
So being a trustee is means that I'm only a caregiver, a temporary person who's taking
mhm,
care of it, and anytime it could perish or so. That's the power I think of this being detached. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was such a wonderful experience to apply. What it felt, what it meant, and
Mhm.
you know how to experience being so conscious, which
Yeah.
is we are eternal and nobody can kill us, and we always exist no matter
Yeah.
what. Just the vehicle will perish or will be destroyed. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really the ideal response to when something happens to the body or relationship or any of these aspects of the ever changing realm here, is to reconnect with that spiritual understanding. And as you say, really apply them and how it will shape how you feel if it's really happening, and I think it's so important. Um, you can do everything right before the pandemic. Now we say you can do everything right and still test positive for COVID. But before you say you can do everything right and still have a heart attack. That's what we used to say. You can eat right, you can exercise, still have a heart attack. It's just the world we live in now. And so constantly we're being, I think, nudged, which is a really positive nudge, nudged more and more towards look at what role does spirituality play in all of this? Given that all the other anchors are kind of falling away, really all that's going to be left is spirituality as my point of stability, and being able to respond, as we say, that adaptation, respond to what's going on from that stable place. everything else is so unpredictable and changing. If I try and anchor in anything else, it's going to kind of fall away. You know, like if I do this, then this should be the result. No. But if I keep focusing on spirituality, I land up in a stable place, regardless of what's going on, how things work out. So yeah, that's a great example, Pauline. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. It's just interesting when you were mentioning about purity and you were talking about peace is not a reaction. And I know that you were in the Peace Medal Awards many years ago and you had shared that peace is not a reaction. And I'm not sure if it was a keynote speaker or whoever was speaking. And said peace as a personality. Was that something you already knew or discovered, that peace is not a reaction? Like when you first came into the study, it does seem like our ideas of peace, we don't even know what that means.
I don't know if I felt it was peace, but I remember, you know, I suppose that happens. You know, there's such a long runway. For different people, it's different length. But a long runway before you actually launch openly, come out of the closet, launch openly into spiritual study. And I suppose mine was a very long runway because I remember being very young and somewhat, part of me was aware that the responses and reactivity I was having, it wasn't quite me. It was a little, I was irritated, not with anything going on, but I was irritated with, I felt like, why am I, you know, I know there's some other way I could respond. The only word I came up with was, you know, mature, that there should be, and eventually it started to see there should be a feeling, a calm, a grounded, a depth that I felt should be there and was not. I don't know if I use the word peace, but I felt there should be a depth there that was not. And ironically, I had a very interesting experience when I was in grade 12. I moved away from my physical family, was living with another family, and so there was this kind of natural detachment. And the family I was living with was, you know, really encouraged a lot of responsibility. So that, you know, it was like they were watering this little seed inside that was kind of waiting to be unleashed, the detachment, the level of responsibility. So it really watered that maturity and depth I was hungry for. And I remember there was one point when a family member had ran into a sudden unknown injury. They were on the other side of the world. It was a sudden injury that they had not anticipated. There was definitely going to be, we had to get them back. I was the younger sibling and they had to get them back and finance, etc. So I got this phone call from the other side of the world and I'm listening and they're explaining the situation. I said, no problem, call me back in 30 minutes. And they're like, I'm sorry? Who are you and what did you do with Judy? Because they were saying they could not believe the difference. Because in those 30 minutes, I was going to take care of arranging the flight. I was going to find the finances. I was going to do it all so that when they called back, I said, here's the information. You're ready to go. There was no way that could have happened in previous years. I was 17 years old. So it was really the ideal spirituality, rather than being hit and miss, spirituality gives you the method. You know, I happened to, the planets kind of lined up at that moment for these innate capacities of the soul to come out, but it shouldn't be hit and miss.
The right lighting.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be hit and miss. Spirituality gives you a clear method of how to emerge. These remarkable, we're not even scratching the surface in terms of our capacities as human beings, as humankind. Not even scratching the surface. Spirituality gives a very clear method of how to educe or emerge our innate capacities. We call them our inheritance from God, but this innate capacities of the soul are activated by a very clear education or method. It's remarkable. So it doesn't have to be hit and miss. You don't have to wait for the perfect scenario. You know, as if other people are all there to support you. You know, that's crazy to ask of other people. So that feeling was always there, that there was some other way of operating. It was very frustrating that I could not access it, and I was being quite petty and immature at times, and you know, that was more frustrating than anything else. So then coming into spirituality, it articulated it and gave a methodology. which I deeply appreciated. So it's not hit and miss anymore.
It does feel like a part of its timing
Mm-hmm.
to actually maybe be tired of doing things in the old way.
A readiness, yeah.
And I don't know, maybe an increased sensitivity that perhaps my experience of peace, for example, is not the real thing. To be able to have the capacity, as you're saying, to accommodate, and it's not like an overthinking analysis thing, to make the right decision, as what Paulina said, to be able to have the capacity to, that you're not using, I guess, external methods to be able to know what feels right.
One way we describe this capacity is the heart of the soul. We say it has a very broad, unlimited heart. The heart, sometimes we use the word intellect, is the same capacity for decision making as for accommodating. A very big heart, very healthy, big heart. The soul is so full, content, confident, powerful. It's not needy. Lack of accommodation is because I'm very, very needy, feeling very empty. So as I fill up, then I'm more available. I can hold more. I can embrace more. I'm less disturbed, less and less disturbed. As we say, I don't get into that petty. So real depth or maturity comes into the soul as I spiritually develop. So this big heart that helps me to make clear decisions that aren't based on little worries and concerns, and the capacity to accommodate, to adapt, adjust. I can really, embrace so much. And this capacity to embrace is probably the most powerful driver for transformation. Change driven by love and respect goes a whole lot further than change that is driven through violence or judgment or punishment or fear. Very minimal change happens through that, and it's certainly not sustainable. Speaking of the body.
All right. Thank you for joining. If souls ever have any topics you'd like to explore in the Soul Cafe, you just are welcome to type in the chat box, email
Are you going to make
the
it?
center. I'm good. We
Okay.
can all be soul conscious and be detached observers. So I guess we'll have a little reflection.
In spiritual study, we say that I, the soul, am a point. That is, I am not physical. I have no physical dimensions, but I do exist. So in the physical realm, I am invisible. But in spiritual terms, I, the soul, am huge. I have massive capacities, so much depth, power, big heart, calm, vast mind. These cannot be measured physically. So physically, I am a point, invisible. But spiritually, I am massive, powerful, benevolent, big-hearted, so much peace that could fill an ocean. This wonderful experience of being a soul. There's nothing physical about me. And yet within me are all the greatest treasures, the most sought after resources in the world reside within me in an unlimited degree. Love, peace, truth, power, purity, kindness, forgiveness, joy. So much packed into just a point. The more I experience my innate qualities as a soul, the more stable I will feel, the more grounded, centered I will feel. And because I am less needy, the easier it will be to embrace change. Because I'm not holding tight onto anything out there anymore. Om Shanti. Thank you for joining. Until next time.
Shanti.
Om
Thank you.
Shanti.
Shanti, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.